The word permaculture was coined by an Australian from Tasmania. His name was Bill Mollison. And the theory of permaculture was first developed in a book, Permaculture 1, which came out in about 1978. So that would be what? 30 years ago now, right? So it's been around about 30 years. But the ideas really of permaculture, permanency in culture, have been around much longer than that. Traditional societies all over the world have applied permanency, and that's how they survived as long as they have so far. Permaculture is really a system, this is one of the definitions, a system of thinking, a way of design principles which are used to design, establish and to manage and improve our efforts as individuals, in our homes and communities towards creating not just a sustainable future. We've got to be careful of that word. Sustainable implies hanging on by your fingernails. We think we can create an abundant world. When you look at a seed, and Dick will tell you this, and you gardeners will know, when you look at a plant, the number of seeds that comes out of any pod, the number of seeds from any plant is not in the hundreds, it's probably in the thousands, maybe it's in the millions, but there's a lot of them, that's the point. Nature is an abundant system. It's an abundant system. We're an abundant system. People might say we're too abundant. There's so many of us now. But we are an abundant system, so let's not leave it just at sustainability. Let's recognise that in this scenario we can seek an abundance. Mollison lived many lives. An authentic bushman, a fisherman, a trapper, a woodsman, a scientist, a naturalist, a lover and observer of nature and her patterns, and subsequently a writer and a world traveller. He became really the father of this idea, bringing it all together from the different cultures, bringing it all together into his book, which became and has become quite famous, establishing this idea of permanency in culture by following some fairly simple directives. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of those tonight, but not too much. We'll be talking largely about what we in permaculture call evidence and context, and why we need to create in our communities what I call nodes of permanence, soft places to land as we go through this inevitable energy descent scenario. We're developing a permaculture demonstration site down in Hancock, where I come from now. I decided to create the Hancock Permaculture Centre after I'd done a couple of permaculture courses, one down in New Orleans and then one in my hometown in Australia, in Melbourne, with Bill Mollison. Came back to the States, and in 2004, basically it's just my house, it's very unpretentious, called it the Hancock Permaculture Centre in Hancock, which by the way is really in the Indian, the Lenape language, called the Wedding of the Waters, because it's where the East Branch and the West Branch of the Delaware rivers meet. We call it Hancock. Pretty prosaic, I thought, but you know, it's really the Wedding of the Waters. It's quite beautiful. You can't actually see it from Hancock, but that's actually where and what it is. Nodes of permanence. Well, I'm here to share with you some of what I've learned on the journey so far, and to explore the idea of these nodes of permanence, places within our communities, within our bioregions that are insulated against the worst aspects of climate change, peak oil and crash and burn energy descent. Places we hope that will and can provide a soft place to land for our children, for our animals and the plants that sustain us, as the Native Americans say, to the 7th generation. And permaculture provides a good foundation to start this process. When we teach permaculture in our 72-hour course, we start with evidence and context. We need to know where we are to see where we might be going and to see where we've come from. Where are we? So let's get grounded and examine where we are today. Now, many people will be familiar with this, but I'm going to go through it again because I think we really need to understand our situation. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to consider your own community, our own community, in terms of our assets and our liabilities. We call this an opportunity survey. That's also part of this idea of context. One way to think about energy is energy in and energy out. How can we tie our energy outputs back into the system? Because the longer we keep energy in the system, the more we benefit from it. Now, waste is actually unused energy. So in permaculture, we're trying to slow energy down, slow entropy. Entropy is inevitable. It's part of the world we live in. If we can slow it down, we get more value and more use from our energy. In fact, the best way to create more energy is not use it at all, to conserve it. When the rain falls from the sky, if we can stop it above our homestead, in a pond, in a dam, in a tank, we're actually conserving energy. And when we turn the faucet on, then it starts again. But the trick is to stop it. A very important concept in permaculture is slowing energy down and keeping water in a usable form. But let me start in my home country. Australia is the oldest, driest continent on Earth and the only one never to have experienced an ice age. The Aborigines have lived there, they say, for 60,000 years. There are still Aborigines in Australia who live in the dream time, when Earth and man were one with the animals and the land and the plants, and the world was dreamed into being. Their society prospered and grew because they followed and learned in songs and in their tattoos and paintings the great narrative of nature. And then in 1769, a man called Captain Cook sailed into a bay he called Botany Bay in Sydney. And look how quickly things changed. Soon thereafter followed the Industrial Revolution. And in about 200 years, we changed the climate. For 60,000 years, the Aborigines walked the landscape. In 200 years, we changed the climate. Great civilizations have risen and fallen through the tides of time, and there's no evidence that ours should be any different. Our society has chosen the path of least resistance, exploiting millions of years of sunlight embedded as energy in oil and coal. It's said that it takes 100 years of sunshine shining on 1 acre of land to create 1 gallon of gasoline. We use that gallon to go and buy our butter at the supermarket. The sun is the original source of all our energy. It's a hydrogen explosion 93 million miles away from Earth. Humans have learned to create smaller scale recreations of the sun and use them at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a result, I would suggest our society is in a constant state of annihilation anxiety and has been since the end of the Second World War. It's an undeniable part of our collective unconscious. In the same way AIDS, the idea of terrorism, and the existential fear that we are killing our planet are now part of the zeitgeist. When one side of a forest is attacked by pestilence, the other side begins to move and leaf out in an act of survival. We believe trees communicate through the mycelium fungus web, which stretches through thousands of acres and covers areas as large as states beneath the ground. The mycelium network is a membrane of interweaving, continuously branching cell chains, just one cell wall thick. We believe it to be the neurological network of nature. Mycelium stays in constant molecular communication with its environment, devising diverse enzymatic and chemical responses to complex challenges. The pestilence that's attacking this side, the other side leafs out, moves away. For those of you with a pencil, you could go to Paul Stammett's website, www.fungi.com. And so as the forest responds, so should we. We know what's happening, so what do we do? In every sense, we need to retreat to higher ground. The vision of permaculture offers real-life, real-time solutions that can be taught and applied on all natural scales. Permaculture is a design system that follows nature's patterns. Permaculture incorporates these patterns into designs that use soft energy alternatives and diverse, resilient systems that will increase yield, lessen work, enliven community, and build basic security as energy descent begins. The first law of thermodynamics, that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, is basic to understanding permaculture. Dissipating the sun's energy in the form of a hydrogen or an atomic bomb, nuclear bomb, uranium bomb, or using that energy to build a sustainable and abundant society is a choice. When we explode a bomb, the energy goes from its source to the sink very rapidly. Exactly the same amount of energy is available to use in other ways if we slow down the entropy. The more we slow down the explosion, the stronger will be the system. The more we slow down entropy, the stronger will be our society. We need to slow entropy, the inevitable dissipation of energy from source to sink. In a nuclear weapon is all the embedded energy of the Manhattan Project, the years of time and resources and labour and energy to produce such a powerful force on Earth. This too is all energy and should be included in the energy audit and the cost of war and destruction, along with the destruction of property and human lives, which are still suffering today, who are still suffering today as we speak. And so should we learn to measure and evaluate all our systems. For the best way, again, to use our energy is to conserve it. Modern technology has created a world artificially maintained by poorly designed systems and planning. It's only because of artificially cheap energy that our badly designed buildings that roast in the sun and freeze in the winter survive at all. And it doesn't have to be this way. The time will come when we will have to use the sun to heat our buildings in the city or the country because conventional heating will be too expensive. Already happening as we speak. You'll see solar greenhouses sprout on the southern sides of buildings, collecting free energy and storing it in water to wash the baby, warm the kettle and the house, or perhaps a nice stone floor as a passive heat sink. This is how we begin to create a permanent culture. We start at home. A time will come when the water that rushes off our roofs and overflows our gutters, our streets and our subways will be harvested and used on our gardens. Grey water is the water we use for washing and bathing. It comprises about 80% of the water we use. It's seen as waste and it's directed into our sewage system. But it can be directed away from conventional sewage system infrastructure and redirected to reed beds and aquaculture ponds and used again and again. Water, as we are beginning to understand, is a depleting resource. The hydrological cycle has been interrupted. Large corporations have bought water rights. It's the next big one coming down the pike. Water is capable of producing 20 to 30 times more protein, maybe more, per acre than land-based systems. because the fish swimming in the water don't have to work so hard. That's basically why the cattle are walking around on the fields. It takes energy because of gravity. The fish are floating. They don't have to use much energy. If we slow the entropic journey of water, we reap the benefits and once again learn from nature's patterns. A time will come when, like the mycelium web, we will reach across the land from our islands of sanity, our nodes of permanence, creating networks and communities and bioregions as the idea of permanence in culture grows and proliferates. For 60,000 years, the Australian Aborigines walked the land singing the map of the journey they called the songlines. And recent Chinese civilization goes back 5,000 years. So the Chinese doctor who touches your pulse is feeling back through the centuries, understanding the language of the body. Modern medicine, so cripplingly expensive, uses machines and computers, and doctors seldom even touch our body to tell us we're sick. And like automobile mechanics, go to work and often make us sicker. In about 200 years, we have profoundly altered the parameters of life. Industrial civilization has changed the weather. There will be more droughts and floods, more devastating storms. Entire climate zones are shifting as ancient glaciers and the polar ice cap melts. The seas are rising, reclaiming the land, and will force large-scale human resettlement. More than 70% of the world's population lives on coastal plains, and 11 of the world's 15 largest cities are on the coast or estuaries: London, Tokyo, New York, Shanghai, Dhaka goes on. It's impossible to know when Wall Street will be drowned, but it may be sooner than we think. Might be happening tonight. Most climate models turn out to be conservative. Things are happening more quickly than we think. Oil is the lifeblood of modern civilization. It fuels most transportation worldwide and is the basis of pharmaceuticals, agriculture, plastics and other products used in everyday life. Without oil and petrochemical fertilizers, the world's food system cannot survive. Destructive post-war industrial agricultural methods have poisoned our land and water and reduced biodiversity. We've lost probably 2/3 of our topsoil, blown and washed away. Between 200 and 400 tonnes of topsoil per acre. Between 200 and 400 tonnes of topsoil per acre per year are lost because of modern agricultural practices, which include mechanised farming and monoculture of the 5 remaining world crops, major world crops: wheat, rice, corn, soy and potatoes. And in the 1960s, there were 12 major crops in the world. Less now. Diversity is decreasing. Talking about the major crops. As we enter the new millennium, food production is now in decline. And we all know what's happening with the so-called ethanol foods, which are forcing the price of wheat up. It's going up a lot too. The newspapers have been so full of other stuff that you don't hear so much about that, but that's a big one to consider, and it's going to affect the third world enormously. We destroy more forests to uncover more land, but such destruction accelerates soil loss and climate change. Human settlement without attention to nature and local natural patterns and resources detracts rather than adds to our environment. Soil grows in the forests, so when we cut down trees and create grasslands, we reduce nature's ability to create soil. Already the world's food system is struggling to feed rising populations as soil loss increases. Modern agriculture replaces the loss of soil nutrients with petrochemical fertilizers. The modern farmer burns oil sitting in an air-conditioned machine equipped with lasers and global satellite positioning technology, installing millions of miles of straight-line monoculture agriculture that slowly kills the land. Whether we like it or not, we have to change and seek more sustainable ways to produce energy and food. We need to audit energy at every level with the objective of reducing energy inputs as we concentrate on designing softer energy outputs like solar and wind power, as other industrial nations have done and are doing. Check out the Dutch, for instance. But we will have to do much more. Excuse me. The term peak oil describes the tipping point when world oil supplies reach projected maximum output. It occurs when about half of the total resource is used, and from now on, we are literally running out of oil. Gas reserves are the only high-quality energy which can substitute for oil with high energy returns, but gas production is set to peak in about a decade. China, and we know it's getting expensive too. China and India, with 1/3 of the world's population between them, know that their economic future is directly tied to finding sufficient energy resources to sustain their rapid economic growth, and they are negotiating with anyone willing to sell them an energy lifeline. The peaking of world oil production presents the US and the world with an unprecedented risk management problem. As peaking approaches, liquid fuel prices and price volatility increase dramatically. And without timely mitigation, the economic, social and political costs will be unprecedented. An unholy trinity of climate change, peak oil and soil loss will force humankind to change. To be sustainable, a system needs to produce more energy than it consumes over the lifetime of the system. It should create enough energy to maintain and replace itself. Pollution is simply misplaced energy. We need to harness it and tie it back into our design. The 50% problem: electricity, coal, and climate change. The United States and most of the rest of the industrial world run on oil and electricity. 50% of electricity comes from burning coal. 50% of electricity permits us to have the lights on tonight and to run the video camera. Coal contributes about 1/3 of greenhouse gases that are causing global warming. We are already over the threshold in terms of particulates in the atmosphere, and we're still building more coal-fired plants, particularly in China, to keep up with the demand for electricity. Therefore, the situation can only worsen. I didn't read this in the newspaper lately. Check out these facts. 50% of our electricity comes from coal. Coal causes 30% of the pollution of greenhouse gases. Any child will understand the outcome of that. Therefore, the situation can only worsen unless we change the way we generate and use electricity. This implies a paradigm shift of such magnitude impossible to imagine. But it is possible, and it will become necessary as the energy descent curve deepens. Permaculture provides a framework to observe, interact, adapt, and change, and understands that waste is really unused energy, and that we can move beyond sustainability to abundant systems capable of softening energy descent. Let me repeat the thesis. About 50% of electricity used to drive industrial nations is produced by burning coal, which contributes about 1/3 of all greenhouse gases. The greenhouse effect is now in a cascading feedback loop as poles melt, reducing reflectivity of sunlight, which already has difficulty escaping our atmosphere and is bounced back to Earth, where less and less ice is available to reflect the sun's heat, and it's absorbed by the darkening sea. As glaciers melt, they yield ancient, fresh, fossil water into the oceans, which desalinate the sea and change the world's ocean currents, affecting weather patterns. Severe storm surges will come before categorical sea level rise. Today, with a day of sustained rain, our cities and towns and surrounding suburbs are brought to a standstill. The cost is high and resettlement difficult and expensive. Many communities settled on ancient floodplains, fertile ground for agriculture, but a bad place to live now and in the future. Droughts are more sustained, water is depleting at an alarming rate, and now a commodity to be traded. For the first time in recorded history, the Northwest Passage between Canada and Russia is ice-free, and falling ice shelves cause level 4 earthquake Richter scale measurements as ice crashes into the ocean. Temperatures are rising, the permafrost is melting, the planet is changing as a result of 200 years of industrialisation. The increasing number of erratic weather events all over the world at the same time are the beginning tremors of climate change. There is no indication that mainstream government and most media are prepared to acknowledge the extent of what appears to be incontrovertible climate change in the coming storm. But climate change is only part of the story. Peaking oil, soil and water depletion, rising energy prices create a confluence of challenges. We know we have a problem. How might we adapt to these changes? I would suggest that changing light bulbs and recycling plastic bags won't help very much. Even changing our driver habits, though necessary, is not the real problem. We need a paradigm shift away from burning coal immediately and by extension the way we use electricity. Our growth model, industrial civilization, is choking us on our own waste. In fact, the waste is unused energy. Energy descent will force us to live in closer collaboration within our bioregions. Issues of food and water security will be primary. Rising energy prices will force us to change. If we prepare, the descent can be softer, and what we call waste today can be energy tomorrow. Now, I believe, despite this dark picture, that it is possible to establish nodes of permanence and in fact abundance within our bioregions. Communities of people who understand where we live by tracing the outlines of our community, a survey of opportunity, of food and water supply, where it comes from, problems and potentials, the legal structures, zoning for appropriate change. By understanding these things, we can create redundant, resilient and sustainable systems that will lead away from the destructive economic growth and resource depletion model to a place where we create and enrich the basis of all our lives, the soil, water, nutritious food. That's where we start. We may not be able to change the world, but we can start at the back door and work from there. It is time for us to act, to learn, to adapt and to change, and at least try to learn, teach and share our knowledge in our attempt to set up nodes of permanence that may be very important sooner than we think. It's a very dark picture, but like I said at the beginning, let's get it right where we are. Let's get the extent of the action and the extent of the problem, and let's start to move. Let's start to, we know we've got a problem, now let's get to the positive. How do we create these nodes of permanence? Creating nodes of permanence. Now I've passed this out. This is a handout at the back of the room. And this is the kind of thing I hope that we're going to discuss when the Mayor gives us a beautiful Edwardian building or Victorian building in downtown Binghamton, maybe for $1, he tells me they're giving them away, and we create our own sustainability centre. But we retrofit it with found glass and metal and wood and sweat labour together, and we put a roof garden on the top, and we put our greenhouse on the southern side, and we get Dick Aldous here to teach us how to garden, and we get together and we set up a CSA food distribution point. We have some juicing there, some good fresh vegetables and juices for the children and for the old guys like me to keep the prostate in order, you know, a bit left yet. And we have some recipes. We have some from the ladies coming down, maybe some of the guys teaching us some canning. We set up a sustainability centre, 1, 2, 3, 4. We could have 5 or 6 of them in Binghamton. Endicott. This is possible, absolutely possible, and it's really necessary, and we should do it, not hard. So creating nodes of permanence, talking points and suggestions, acknowledging change, peak oil, energy descent, financial insecurity, climate change, political uncertainty, planning for the future, providing information, education and skills for the future to the 7th generation. 1. 2. Understanding where we live, the geography, the climate, the landscape, the water, access and the structures. Where are we? 3. Food inputs. They say most food travels about 1,500 miles to get to the supermarket, and that there's about 3 days' supply on the supermarket shelf. So it'd be a good idea to start stacking up on your grains and your dry goods at home. All of us should be doing this, and at our sustainability centre. Food inputs, vulnerability and centralisation, need for diversity and resilience. 4. Water supply, storage, control, flood mitigation and community resettlement. We're creating nodes of permanence. 5. Home energy auditing and retrofitting, solar thermal systems, wood stoves, passive energy, solar electricity, recycling, education and opportunities. 6. Community living, eco-villages and planned communities and institutions, schools and places of gathering like this church. 7. Communications, community feedback, local media, community radio, community television, internet, data oversupply, face-to-face communications, reading and research groups. We need some research groups to research some of this stuff so we begin to know who's doing what in our community. There are many people, not just me, not just you, doing this kind of work and concern. There are many of us concerned. So let's get together, let's find out who they are. We need some research groups to find out who's out there, who's doing what, where are the skill sets in our community. Where's the blacksmith? Where's the welder? Where's the guy that knows about wood? Where's the guy that knows about electricity? Where are these people? They're all over the place. We just don't have their addresses yet. 7. Legal structures, one of the most important. Legal structures, zoning and obstacles to sustainability and change. Talk to the Mayor about this one. We've got to talk to the Mayor, we've got to have a good case, we've got to understand legal structures is right up there with difficulty in changing systems. We don't all have to be gardeners like Dick. We need lawyers, we need other people with other skills to help us create these nodes. Reskilling workshops, alternative education, learning permaculture is part of that. Natural green building workshops, available teachers and examples. Non-violent communication, consensus facilitation. Transportation, bicycles, car share, ride share, rail. When are they going to get a nice transportation system, get some human beings instead of all this rubbish onto the train that goes through Binghamton past my house in Hancock? Medicine and health information, sharing, home birthing, yoga, community connections, sewage disposal, placement and biological systems. Sewage costs an enormous amount of money. 80% of what's going through the sewer doesn't have to be going through it. It's wastewater from your washing machine, from the dishes. It's actually good for your garden if you've got organic dishwasher you're using to wash your clothes and whatnot. We don't have to be paying a lot of money in these inefficient, engineered, energy gobbling sewage systems, pumping systems. Opportunity assessment, energy inputs, outputs in our community, closing the loops. Complementary currencies, investing where we live. That's it, folks. That's my presentation. You know, it's great. I know it's pretty heavy information, but this is where we're at.
For the past 30 years, there are communities who are self-sustaining all over the world, and they've been doing all of what you're suggesting. So we just have to look at them. Go see where they are, see what they've been doing. They've been doing it. It's just the majority have not been doing it. So we have these isolated communities, but they're out there. They're welcome. People are welcome to visit them. I've visited them. And they're doing what you're saying. They're self-sustaining. They're not polluting. They're learning to live within their spot of land. And it could be 300 people in a community, could be 500 people, could be smaller. They're doing it, so it's possible.
Absolutely possible.
So it's just that the majority, if they could start doing it, then we're on a roll.
Well, let me say one thing about that, if I may, ma'am. You know, I don't think most people are going to do it. That's history. About 90% of people aren't going to do it, but 10% are. And we only need the 10%. And we are the part of that 10%. And the rest will either follow or they won't. But you know, I'm not going to hold my peace sign up and say peace. Bill Mollison says what drives him is blind fury. He got so sick of holding up his peace sign trying to stop the Vietnam War, he said, I've got to do something. So he started permaculture. That's what he got going. I'm not saying you shouldn't hold up your peace sign, go to this vigil tomorrow. You should. But at the same time, let's get out into the garden. Next.
Yes, you said that modern agricultural practice is destroying topsoil. Now, this is in the hands of agribusiness right now that provides us most of the food that we eat, unfortunately. What are they thinking? What is modern or the agribusiness thinking? Do they want to be in business 20 years from now or 10 years from now or even a couple years from now? I mean, they're destroying their own business. I haven't figured that one out yet, Andrew.
No. Well, I haven't either, but I would say this. It's my understanding that most corporations basically only think as far as the next quarter. They don't think out 7 generations. They don't think out 1 generation. They don't think out 10 years. They don't think out 5 years. The Japanese do. That's why they took over this country's car industry. But our country does not. I mean, that's pretty obvious. A few companies do, but not many. So I don't think you can rely on the corporations to change. That's why we need to set up our own communities and change ourselves. Can't rely on the government, can't rely on the corporation, you can rely on your neighbours. That's what I think.
I just wondered what impact the depletion of the honeybees would have on sustainability and permaculture.
The colony collapse question?
That continues.
Well, you know, that's a big story, and Dick may know more about it than me. There's been a lot of theories, but maybe we should talk about that another time. One thing I would suggest is one of the things we should learn some beekeeping. I don't know whether people are doing that up around here. I don't have bees on my property, but I want to get a beehive onto my property. Absolutely important. But if you think the way we use the bees, we put all these hives on a tractor trailer, we transport them here, we transport them there, we move them here, we move them there. Some people say all the cell towers, all the electromagnetic information up in the atmosphere is affecting them. Probably is, could be, I don't know. Once again, let's get some beekeeping workshops in Binghamton. That's my answer. Let's do it ourselves. Let's not wait for science. Let's not wait to read it in Nature. Let's get out ourselves, learn, teach, share.
A quick comment on the bee thing. As I understand it, it's largely a phenomenon of large-scale bee culture, and the small-scale organic type growers are not having this problem at all. So, you know, the bigger you get, and that's big-scale agriculture, almonds, peaches, whatever in California. By the way, how many of you heard about the bee truck that crashed today and just spilled how many millions and millions of bees? Well, that wouldn't happen if they weren't trucking millions and millions of bees from one place to another. So it's largely a function of that. Where they don't do any of this stuff, particularly over most of the landscape, I was just in New Zealand, and the honeybees all over the place.
I was listening to him talk about like big agriculture, and I was just thinking about the lawn as a function of the way that we could all change. I bet everyone here has a lawn or has some part of mown grass in their yard. Like if you just turn that into a wildflower meadow, you'll be increasing your biodiversity by like an amazing geometric amount, and you will be attracting bees. So just get a book on creating a wildflower meadow or a book on perennials that can talk about wildflower meadows, and create your own wildflower meadow. And hopefully it will be so beautiful that the ordinance people will not like try to make you cut it down. So, you know, just like mow a tiny lake of lawn in the middle so that people say, oh, that's not your lawn, those are your borders, it's okay. So the other thing I wanted to say is that I noticed that as a person who's a teacher who taught young people, hi Shannon, she used to be my student, I noticed that like, you know, and I also have a child who is 1.5. And I invited one of the officers of the local Sierra Club, who is no longer a member. This is why I'm telling the story. And he to my baby shower when I was pregnant, and he said, "Why should I be getting you a present for, polluting overpopulating the planet, destroying the environment, and ruining my world?" And what I didn't think to say is, well, because, somebody like my child is going to be taking care of you when you're old someday. But, I mean, the other thing is that we have to involve children in this in whatever way that we can. I mean, we need to make children feel welcome, and we need to teach them these principles, because if you don't work with young people, no movement will sustain itself and no movement will have continuity. And if you preach doom and gloom, it's okay to know where you are, and it's good to preach doom and gloom. But you have to preach that there is something here for everyone, and that something is your connection with nature.
My name is Barbara Abbott King. I live in southern Cuyahoga County, and in my area, corporate farming is now destroying our traditional farms and our farmland. And my question to you was, have you ever talked to the state engineer about land use planning and how engineering has become an intrinsic part of our agricultural system, and that those people in their discipline have linked themselves to the hip of us agriculturalists and changing the way we farm to their model of what you call monoculture? And I approached these gentlemen, Peter Wright from Cornell. He had been part of Pro Dairy for a decade and is now our state engineer. He is reporting our an environmental situation or lack of to the federal government, the EPA, and on our water and air quality standards. So dangerously enough, we find ourselves living in an environment not only changing our system of traditional organic or low-impact chemical fertilizing way of growing crops and livestock, feeding livestock, but now we have to conform to a CAFO system that's destroying our communities and leaving many of us traditional agriculture production people scratching our heads whether it's even ethical to grow crops in this system that our state government and our federal government is making us through their CAFO system and their regulation to do. This is a very disturbing situation to many of us in the country who have invested our livelihoods in growing crops and food, and whether we can work with our local planning boards and our local town boards, who many of these boards are comprised of traditional agricultural people, whether we can change in time to fight the state's policy is questionable. So I'm going to ask you that hard question of how do we get these people out of our agencies? How do we overthrow this CAFO system and start subscribing to some of the theories and some of the hard, cold realities, recognizing that we have limited time to turn this around? How do we do this? And by law, have to feed our money into this system? Well, that's the structure now that anybody with livestock has to adhere to. There's a large CAFO, which is 699 animals and up. And many of the farms in my area are over 2,000 animals. It's also according to the weight of the animal. So the heifers and the calves are also figured into the amount in a large CAFO. Mid-sized CAFOs have to be permitted by the end of 2008. And there is a permitting cost to that size farmer. He has 299 animals to 699. And then the smaller agriculturalist, it doesn't have to come on board with this permitting system until maybe 2010 or beyond. They call the non-CAFO people AFOs. I choose to call them traditional agriculturalists. So what it's done is destroyed our agricultural community. It's separated us. And the actual plan is for the large CAFO people, the corporates, to take over our water and our land. They have the money and the resource through this modern granting system of our state government to do so. They're getting free money. It's a welfare system that's been designed by our land-based or land-grant universities that are fully funded, many of which are fully funded by our state government. So it's a very vicious system, and it's eating us alive, those people who want to stay in farming.
I'll just say one thing in closing. There are groups already set up. Over in Franklin, there's a peak oil group which is now spreading out and looking at sustainability issues. I was over there talking to them a week ago. Great group of people. They publish their own little publication. I think if we can start this, and if many of you turn up on the 12th, Saturday the 12th of next month at the Broome County Library, that'll be a great start. I believe we really can do something about this very negative dark cloud that's hanging over us. And in fact, we may be very surprised and find that we begin to live better, live healthier within our own communities, have a better life for now and into the future if we start to act and use the knowledge that we do have in our community. It exists in our community. We've just got to draw it all together and find some strength and start moving forward. Thank you very much.
Most of you know me. I'm Chris Berger. I've worn a number of hats over the years, part of various organizations. I guess relevant tonight would be certainly the Sierra Club. I actually chair the state's solid waste committee for the Sierra Club. I'm also a member of the National Zero Waste Committee under Sierra Club. And I'll get back to that a little later because we have some national initiatives that I want to briefly mention. I have 15 minutes to basically solve the problem of waste, right? So it's not going to happen, but the way I talk about sustainability is I zero in onto our resource, how we utilize resources. And those of you who have heard me speak before, this is old hat to you, but basically when you think about how we use resources, we mine the resources, we process those resources, we use the resources, many times one-time use, don't we? And then we dispose of the resources. And the thing to take away from that is, number one, is that's not how nature uses resources. Nature uses resources in cycles, right? And we all know that the Gaia principle was mentioned a little earlier. That kind of encapsulates how nature as a whole sets up cycles, and there's no waste in nature, ultimately, because countless cycles have developed around resource utilization, unlike the way we use resources. This linear approach to using resources in a finite world with finite resources is unsustainable. It's pure and simple. The fact that we think we can continue to use resources in that way is probably a measure of, number one, our arrogance, and number two, how much we feel disconnected from nature itself. We should know intuitively in our guts that we can't operate in that fashion, yet we continue to do so as individuals and as a society. So tonight I basically want to kind of take two tacks here. One, certainly what we can do on the personal level, because I think Andrew, the nice thing about what Andrew talks about is he does bring it down to the personal, what we can do as individuals. But then we also need to talk about what we can do as a community right here and then further up. Because I'll tell you, from my own personal experience, you know, we tried, the first Earth Day actually inspired us, my family and I, to try to work at our waste and how we could reduce our waste. And over time, we got our waste down significantly. Not zero waste yet, but as I typically say in my workshops, pretty darn close. What we've done as a family is basically gotten ourselves down to about 3/4 of a pound per person per year. And to give you a little visual on that, it has basically taken us 15 years to fill up a paper grocery bag with waste. So It can be done. Now, let me say this also up front. Like I said, we didn't get there overnight. We've been working at this for a while, but also how important it points to how important it is to develop a community infrastructure to assist that. Believe me, it was very, very difficult when we started out. And this, think back 20 years ago, there was virtually no recycling programs in existence. Oh, I should also mention, I just kind of got sidetracked in my introduction here, the different organizations that I've been involved with. I've also been involved over the years with the Environmental Management Council. And while I was part of that organization, I'm still a part of it, but years back when we had that infamous incinerator fight, a number of us were feeling that we shouldn't simply be against an incinerator, we should be for something. And basically what we did is I spearheaded an effort and was a prime author to a recycling program definition report that basically set out the vision of the recycling program that we have today. So, and that was an important development because like I began to say, certainly my life was a whole lot easier after we got that recycling program in place. Other organizations that I'm involved with is Earth Day Southern Tier. It seems like I've been on that forever. Well, in fact, I have, actually, since its inception, now that I think about it. So I sit on that board, and that group primarily puts on the Earth Fest every year, which you're all invited to attend again this year, 26 over in Roberson, just as an aside. I teach college, a course called Science, Technology, and Society. I also chair the newly formed Energy Commission for the county, which will be advising the county on its energy policies. And then I also was a part for a good many years of a project called the Eco-Justice Project, which was housed over at Cornell University. And basically what we did there was think about, we were kind of a think tank on sustainability, basically. Trying to think through what the implications were given the reality that we live in a finite world with finite resources and looking into the future, there was no way we could continue the way we're operating today. So with that background, let me get back to certainly I can attest here today that given some time, effort, and attention to details, it is possible to reduce your waste on a personal level. How do we do that? Briefly, because I give workshops on this, but briefly, basically, starting out with number one, when you go to a store, ask if you really need a product. It's amazing how often that question isn't even asked. Do we really need it? And then if we decide we need it or want it, are we willing to take responsibility for it? And that basically takes disposal off the table as an option. If you want to take something into your life, you best be prepared to deal with it in some fashion. And basically as a strategy, just if I were to encapsulate that strategy, basically what we're doing is avoiding things that we can't reuse, recycle, or compost. And that comes down ultimately to materials that are composite in nature, where you have materials that are fused together. I'm sure you've all run across that type of packaging and the like, where you simply cannot take it apart. Obviously, we're committed to taking anything apart into its components to recycle. But if there are things out there that you simply can't do that, and those are obviously what we avoid. So that on a personal level, just to say up front that we should all be working at that. Number two, what can we do as a community? Well, folks, I think you can pat yourself on the back in some sense in this regard, because certainly we have one of the better recycling programs in the nation right here in our own backyard. This community has an excellent recycling program. Is it perfect? No. We can obviously improve on it, but you go to other parts of the country and you'll be amazed how far we've progressed in our own recycling program. But unfortunately, that's not enough. Certainly, obviously, what we're doing on a personal level, and I live out in the country, so I can do this easier than a lot of folks, we're obviously composting. There are folks that can't do that or don't know how. Obviously, we can teach people how to do composting. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, just like we developed an infrastructure for our recycling, we have to develop an infrastructure for composting as well. You know, years ago, again, back at that incinerator, when the big debate over the incinerator, it seemed like at least everybody was on the same page that we need to be moving away from landfilling. Yet here we are 20 years later, we've had a good dent in our waste stream with some figures are pointing to about 60% recycling that we accomplish as a community. Yet we continue to use that landfill, and a good deal of organics continue to go into that landfill. So that's another big project that is still waiting to be done. And as it turns out, that the county, by law, it's been 20 years now that we had a comprehensive solid waste management plan in place. This is on the county level now, the one that basically has put together the recycling program and operates the recycling program. That the county is in the process of reviewing that plan. Now, ironically, they had composting in that plan, but we haven't accomplished that. So this is an opportunity that I think we can all pay attention to and try to influence to get that agenda back on track. Also, as it turns out, the state is also starting to review its comprehensive solid waste management plan. So I would encourage people to get involved in that process as well. So whatever level, we have to tackle this on many levels, and there are two opportunities right up front where we can have an impact and have input into that process. So I would encourage you to do that. On a national level, just briefly, I want to share with you what the National Sierra Club Zero Waste Committee, and now officially the board itself has adopted, the National Sierra Club Board has adopted. It's a policy called Extended Producer Responsibility. And the idea behind that is actually something very similar that they've already kicked off in Europe, and that is making the producers of a product responsible for its ultimate recapture. That it requires producers, if they want to put a product out into the marketplace, to actually have a plan on how they are going to recover that material and get it back into circulation. It's not going to, and pay for it. And they have a lot of options where they can basically either do it internally, you go back to the store and take that product, or they could pay for a recycling program, pay into a recycling program. So I'm out of time, but basically that's something that's happening on a national level that I encourage you to pay attention to and support. So we'll leave it at that.
My name is Kevin Mathers from Cornell Cooperative Extension, and they asked me to talk a little bit about composting. Most of the time when I talk about composting, it's kind of the how-to compost. So this is a little different venue for me. But just out of interest, how many people here do compost already? Wow. That's unusual. My job is done. But I thought I'd share a few things with you. Actually, my job's easier than Chris's because I only have the organic portion of the waste stream that I have to solve. He had to solve the whole waste stream. So, but the organic part of the waste stream is a significant part of it, and Chris alluded to that. And there's probably got to be multiple solutions to the problem, as Chris mentioned. Not everybody is going to compost in their backyard, but hopefully a lot of people will, and even more than are doing it now. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But one of the things I think the whole view of, people have a view of things as waste. And then waste becomes a burden. And what do you have to do with this stuff that we no longer want? And so let's make it real easy for people to get rid of it. And so now we have these systems where you can just throw something in a garbage can and it gets carried out to the curb for you if you're not the one responsible in the house to get it out to the curb, and it magically disappears. And you never see it again unless you're one of the unfortunate people that has to live next to the landfill. And so we've made it so easy for people to throw things out that they don't even realize that they're throwing out a resource. And with composting, the nice thing about that is if you actually start to compost, you can actually view the organic waste that's coming from your home as a resource, because you can put it right back to use on your own property, which is a really, really nice thing. It's a little bit simpler than recycling. You know, I talk to people about recycling also, and having them understand that all the things that go out to the curb have to go first to a sorting center, and then they get sorted, and then they may get sent to another sorting center. And then they may get sent to a place where they get melted down into little pellets. And then they may get sent to still another place where they actually get made into a new product. So it's actually a pretty complex system. Composting is pretty simple, pretty easy to do. And luckily we got a lot of helpers to get that done. The other night I was watching, composting I think is getting a little bit more popular. There's more people aware of composting. Gardening has become a big thing in this country, which is good. And I think that has raised the awareness of it. The other night I was watching the Weather Channel, and I just had actually intended to tune in just for a little while. And then they had a special that was part of their series where they were looking at global warming issues. And it featured a firm called TerraCycle. And I don't know if anybody here is familiar with TerraCycle, but they actually produce a liquid tea, compost tea, that's made from worm castings, or if you will, worm poop, as my son calls it. And they bottle it and reuse soda bottles. And it's now being sold widely, even in places like, you know, Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, places like that are carrying this product. And it was kind of a neat story. I mean, it was nice that they're able to take waste, they take food waste, they compost it with worms, and they also have farmers who do this for them, so they have to buy in external castings. And then they brew it up. So they heat the water up a little bit, and they add oxygen to it, and they brew up this solution, basically a tea, and then they bottle it, and they package it, you know, send it out on a truck, and then people buy it. And then people feel good about buying it because they're buying, you know, worms turn this garbage into poop, or into food. They turn this poop into food, and then they packaged it in this thing that normally was garbage. And so I'm going to buy it, and it's an organic product, or essentially organic product, and I can use it on my plants and grow healthier plants. And it is a good thing. But when you think about it, it's a tremendous amount of resources going into getting this product out to you folks where you can use them. You know, they're buying in some of the castings, so some of the worm castings actually have to be, you know, hauled to them. And even before that, the food waste has to be collected and hauled to the worms. So you can start to see the fossil fuel connection here. Okay, and then they use more fossil fuels to heat up the water to extract the nutrients from the worm castings. And they bubble in some air, so that requires some more of the coal that we heard about earlier from Andrew. And then we put it all on a truck, of course, and use more fuel to get it out to you. And then you get in your car and you drive down to the store and buy it and bring it back home. So somewhere in the message of, this is a good thing, you really have to kind of look between the lines, I think. And that's kind of, that type of composting is probably better, that's at least using things again. But it's really not going to, I think, solve our problems like we really need to solve them. And it's kind of the different, large-scale composting is great, but I think we need to centralize, make those things less centralized. The more on-site composting we do, the better. Home composting, because you eliminate a lot of those fossil fuel costs. I was thinking about, large-scale composting. We have to pick up all that waste at the curb. We haul it to a central site. We use fancy equipment. They have these things called compost turners. They have a diesel engine frequently, and they turn the compost, and then when they're all done, either somebody has to come and collect it themselves, or you have to put it in a truck and haul it to where it goes. So in some ways, it's kind of like this example I just gave you. So when we have large-scale composting, which we do in Broome County, we compost almost all of our yard waste in Broome County gets composted. It doesn't go in the landfill, so that's a good thing. But we need to get more people composting it at home, because you eliminate those costs, those fossil fuel costs, to do that. We're not going to probably get everybody. And probably in the meantime, we also need some systems like Chris has suggested to capture more of the stuff from the people that are going to take longer to bring along in this whole effort. But home composting is great because you reduce that fossil energy thing. You can improve the health of your soil, which is really important, because it seems to me that if we're going to have this permaculture view, that we're going to ask a whole lot of our soil. Fortunately, we've got lots of volunteers to help, probably billions or even trillions. And those volunteers will readily eat your waste. And you probably figured out that I'm talking about bacteria and fungi and all the other things in there that are helping to break down those materials. And so the nice thing about the system is that we really don't have to do that much. You just have to make sure there's enough moisture there for those bacteria, make sure that there's some air there for those bacteria. If you get ambitious and you want to turn your compost a little bit, you can do that, but you don't even have to do that, and you'll end up with a product that you can use. And there's also some global warming benefits. You're actually sequestering carbon in your soil. You're not only improving the health of the soil, but you're sequestering carbon in the soil. So maybe someday you can even get a credit for the carbon that you return to your soil and your own garden. Wouldn't that be nice? I'm not sure if they'll figure out the logistics of that one. That one could be a bit difficult, but you can feel good about doing it, and that's the main thing. And if a lot of you already are doing this, which is great, but if you know others who aren't and are a little hesitant to do it, feel free to point them in our direction, because we have a free program here in Broome County. We can provide free literature. We have workshops. I have volunteers, called Master Composter volunteers, that help me. I have a couple trainees right in the room here that are being trained as we speak. So we've got help here in Broome County to help more people compost and compost at home, which is my ultimate goal.
My name's Amelia Ladoce. I'm the Sustainable Development Planner for the City of Binghamton. I work in the planning department there. And the subject of my talk, food accessibility, is an aspect of sustainability that's often overlooked. A lot of you might not have really heard much about this, so I'm going to give you some definitions. Excuse me already. I'm all right, thanks. So the term food access refers to whether or not a person can actually obtain the necessary levels of appropriate foods needed to maintain an adequate diet. Some of the barriers to food access include the location of supermarkets and other food shops, physical and socioeconomic factors such as age, physical health, public transportation, car ownership, income. So for instance, if you don't live within walking distance to a supermarket and you don't have a car, you might not be able to get fresh fruits and vegetables. You're going to wind up going to a corner shop, buying highly processed foods at a higher price than you'd even have to pay at a supermarket. So that's a really good example of problems with food access. Now, when a person's access to food is limited to the point where There are times during the year when they can't obtain sufficient food for a healthy diet. We call that food insecurity. And to give you an idea of the status of food insecurity in our country today, there's about 11% of our population, 11% of US households that were food insecure at some point in 2006. So that means about 35 million adults and children, about 13 million children, were at a point sometime during 2006 where they weren't able to have a sufficient meal on the table. Now, we don't have the statistics for the cities in the greater Binghamton area, but we have estimates for Broome County's food insecurity rate, which is about 10%. So that means about 20,000 people in Broome County are food insecure. Now, if you want to see an example of a community that is facing issues of food access in our area, you can just look right to the north side of Binghamton. There is no grocery store on the north side of Binghamton. We call that a food desert. It's a popular term that's coming up. There are food deserts in urban areas, also in rural areas. If you live out, I grew up in a community, Tully, just north of here, about 60 minutes. There's no grocery store for 25 miles. That's also what we call a food desert. So the north side is just like many communities in our country. It's very typical of low-income urban communities. About half of the households in the north side don't have access to vehicles. That's from the US Census. And the nearest grocery store is a mile away. Residents have been fighting to bring a grocery store to their community for years, but haven't accomplished that. So that means for a resident on the north side, they have to take a 30 to 45-minute commute by bus, taking one transfer, 2 buses, to a grocery store a mile away on the east side, or they can take a cab and pay cab fare. And research tells us that people in this situation are more likely to have diabetes, to be obese, because they're not eating enough fresh fruits and vegetables. They're eating diets high in fats and processed sugars. And this is a serious inequality in our country. So you might be thinking, how is this linked to sustainability? And I'm going to get there. So if I think about sustainability in a very holistic sense, to me, sustainability has 3 major prongs: the environmental, the economic, and the social. All of these aspects are integrated. And this could be a topic of a longer conversation that we can't do today, but if it isn't clear to you how these aspects are linked, just even ask yourself, when you envision a sustainable community, do you envision a community that is not only environmentally sustainable, but you also envision one that is economically secure and socially just? And if you do, then I think that this link makes sense. So when we're thinking about making our food system more sustainable, then we can't forget to address social issues like food accessibility and food insecurity. If we want to create a food system that promotes organic production, sustainable production, we can't have that unless our population can actually afford to purchase those products and to access them. So by broadening our focus and priorities within the environmental movement and our sustainability movement, we can bring more people to the movement, one, and also address these core social inequities. And this is starting to happen more frequently on a national scale, and even in our local communities with the community food security movement. You can look that up on the internet. I'll give you a link in a minute. But also within the local food movement. So some examples of the positives and what we can do, because this is a complicated issue. I know I can't really get into all of the details of food accessibility. That's just, I just wanted to touch on it for you and briefly mention some things we can do to make the situation better. So as we work towards making a more environmentally sustainable food system, let's think of ways that we can prioritize the social issues to make headway on both of these aspects. For example, if we're trying to create a local food system so we can reduce the miles that our food travels, reduce our dependence on foreign fuels, what can we do to make that food more accessible to low-income people, to everyone? And it's not just low-income people, it's elderly people who maybe can't get out and and drive anymore, so they need help accessing this food. So let's think when we set up farmers markets, can we locate them in neighborhoods where they'll be most accessible to people that can't drive or maybe are just very busy? So in neighborhoods where there's families, can we also make sure that the markets are held at times when people can really get to them, working families especially. Let's also make sure that farmers markets accept all forms of payment, not just cash, but food stamps, and also the Farmers Market Nutrition Program coupons, which people participating in WIC and also elderly people can get. And when we build community gardens, let's think, where can we build them where the people who don't have cars can get to them? We have a community garden out in Otsoningo Park, maybe not the best place. We're getting some now in the city of Binghamton, which is fantastic, in the center of the city, and we're looking to spread to the west side and the north side. And let's be conscious of where we're placing them. And then also, let's think about working together with people that have all sorts of interests in the food system: food processors, food retailers, consumers, food pantries. We can work as food policy councils or food security coalitions to come up with local solutions to our local problems. And I encourage you to go to www.foodsecurity.org, and that will give you a lot of information on these sorts of things.
My name is John Yerger. For those of you who don't know me, I know quite a few people in the room. I'm chairman of a group called Earth Day Southern Tier. It's a all-volunteer organization, not-for-profit, registered not-for-profit organization that's been in existence since 1990, which was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. And the group was formed to celebrate that event, and it's been going ever since. One of the things that we do is sponsor the Earth Fest every year. And the reason we do that is the mission, if you will, of Earth Day Southern Tier is to bring information, education to the general public about a greener way of life, about subjects like zero waste, like Chris Berger is on our board of directors, has been there forever, I guess, according to his statement. He was there long before I got there. I kind of came into Earth Day Southern Tier sideways. I was working in solid waste disposal for a large electronics manufacturing firm in Endicott, with 3 letters in the acronym. And I'm retired from there now. Anyway, I was representing IBM at the Earth Fest, and one of the things we did is display our methods and our means of dismantling and recycling all the component materials of information technology equipment, printers, computers, everything from the glass and the monitors down to the insulation on the wire. All of it is being still recycled. And as it turned out, I rather got involved and enjoyed what Earth Day Southern Tier was doing, got more involved with Earth Fest, with presenting programs, with presenting information. We have, for example, Kevin Mathers has been with Earth Fest for a number of years, has presented many programs. He will be presenting again on April 26th at Roberson Memorial from 10 to 5, free admission, open to the public. By the way, the planetarium and the Audubon exhibit will all be open for free also. So, like I said, we've been an ongoing organization. We've been doing things with the community, trying to educate them, trying to bring information, make it easier for them to lead a greener life, if you will. And I got invited last July by another VISTA volunteer, similar to the position that Ken is now in. Jaron Wyman invited me to a meeting at Columbus Park in Binghamton to talk about urban gardens, community gardens, if you will. And I got hooked on that too, as it turns out. Not only did she invite me because she thought I would be interested, but she also knew I was on the board of Earth Day Southern Tier. And one of the things they were looking for was a sustainable, if you will, organization to keep urban gardens going and growing, no pun intended, in the Binghamton area. And so we started having meetings monthly. The people that were interested in forming community gardens in the Binghamton area, And we decided, since we are meeting regularly and since we are an organized group, that we should have a name for ourselves. So it was put out onto the internet to everybody who had an internet connection, and we decided that we're going to call ourselves VINES, Volunteers Improving Neighborhood Environments. It just seemed to fit. We have one of our members, Shane Akins, is working on a logo for us. Basically, it looks like a V-shaped city block with trees on one side and city buildings on the other, and a plant, or a vine, if you will, going up through the center of this. And we hope to be selling T-shirts at Earthfest this coming April 26th to bring some money into the coffers, because right now Vines is zero balance, and it's a checking account and savings account and every other account that it has. But what Earth Day Southern Tier adds to this is we've more or less taken Vines under our wing, formed sort of an umbrella administrative organization over Vines so that we can use our position as a registered not-for-profit to apply for grant monies and grants in kind, equipment in kind, and to just help organize the people and keep it running. And it's something that's really easy for us to do. Not only was I invited to the meetings for Vines, but they cajoled me into being a co-chairman of the group. And then promptly afterwards, the other co-chairman resigned. So, as it turns out, I'm also chairman of Vines, which is not a big deal, because I really, really enjoy the people that are involved in this. They're interested in what they're doing. We have going for us right now 3 sites in the city. On the one near Columbus Park, one on the south side, one on the north side. Mayor, maybe he has some aspirations, I don't know. Mayor Ryan's office has been very receptive and is very supportive of what we're doing. I work with some of the people in his administration to help identify more sites throughout the city. And these are sites that are targeted, as Amelia mentioned, into areas that are food deserts, or people are challenged to obtaining nutritional foods. And this is something that you have to do very carefully, because there are a number of vacant lots and vacant properties in the city, but you also have to pay attention to what has been on that property. Was it a parking lot? Was it a manufacturing site? Was it a dry cleaning business? You know, things like that. We have to pay attention to that. But we've taken tours of the areas, and we've targeted a few of the sites. There's some possibilities of establishing some more gardens. And it isn't, we're not restricting it to only food crops. There are some areas that would just benefit from a little bit of horticulture, maybe some plants, maybe some trees, some bushes, some flowering plots. And we're hoping to get into that too. We have a website out on the City of Binghamton. If you go to the City of Binghamton website and click on Community Gardens, you'll find more information about what Vines is and when we meet, and some classes that are coming up. There are 2 classes coming up that we're presenting to the people that are involved in Vines, because it's important that they have the education to allow them to be successful in the urban gardening effort. One of those is March 24th. Kevin is presenting a longer dissertation on composting, more information. And on the 27th, March 27th, Renee Sloop is presenting information and a class on raised bed gardening, which is the most efficient way to use the properties that we're talking about here. Number one, it concentrates the fertile soil into the areas that are actually being used for growing. And number two, it in some cases it allows us to form a barrier between whatever was on the ground before it became a vacant lot and the medium that is being used for growing plants and vegetables. I don't have an awful lot more to add to that, other than Vines is an ongoing program. We are pursuing the location of more sites. We take advantage of programs and software out there on the internet like FreeCycle. That I don't know if you've heard of FreeCycle, but people can list materials that are available for free, and people can list needs that they have for material. And we can always use things like lumber, treated lumber, especially to build raised beds, soil, stakes for staking plants. And we're in the process of pursuing the sources for those, either through grants or from some of the local businesses here looking for sponsors and we will be going out and talking to more people to look for those materials so we can get going, because it's already March, soon it'll be April. Everybody knows that you don't plant anything before Memorial Day, right, because of the threat of frost, but we don't have a lot of time left, so we have to start moving on things.
Okay, I'm Dick Andrus, and I study sphagnum moss. And that's why I'm up here talking about gardens. I want to repeat a story some of you may have heard. I think it was yesterday on NPR. It was a story from Raleigh, North Carolina. The town or the city government had passed a law outlawing garbage disposals. From an ecological point of view, a spectacularly logical thing to do. And they'd created a hell of a ruckus. Oh, you can't tell me what to do. This is America. And if I want to stuff my garbage down the sink, I got a right to. Blah, 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 from the incinerator people or whatever, who said, well, don't blame it on us. Other people are doing it too, and so on. But I just thought that's just so funny, because I finally made the connection a few years ago. It wasn't. How many years ago do you think we started to have real problems with the sewage treatment plant? Maybe someplace between maybe 15 years ago. Well, that was right about the time we went to a bag system in Binghamton. And when we went to a bag system in Binghamton, the sales of garbage disposal skyrocketed. It was right in the paper. And gee, you think that had anything to do with the fact the sewage treatment plant couldn't handle the load that was coming down it? Now, people were actually, excuse me if you have a garbage disposal, but nutty enough to think that it made even economic sense to pay for the money to put in an incinerator to avoid probably 25 cents a week worth of disposal costs for garbage. Well, I mean, it's absolutely obvious that that's going to affect the sewage treatment plant. But people were doing it to save, a quarter a week or something like that, and no comment, no nothing, just go ahead and do it. So, but it's typical, because here you take something which other people point out is a resource, you turn it into a waste, which creates a problem, which then actually hurts property values for people, because they have to live in this stench half the year whenever the weather gets warm, and we don't make the connection. But this is absolutely typical. Well, let me just make a few comments about waste that has kind of been made before, but just so I can set the context to what I want to say. Comment's been made, waste does not exist in nature. Well, it doesn't exist in nature except from the standpoint of energy, which has also been brought out, entropy. And it turns out that from an ecological point of view, the faster a process goes, the more waste energy, the more entropy it's produced. Okay, less efficient. Simple example, which anybody can relate to. If you're trying to get fuel economy, you don't go down the highway at 80 miles an hour. You go down the highway, if you're like me, driving everybody nuts, 55 down the interstate, watching the fuel consumption on my Prius. When my wife's sitting over there, where is he doing this? But it turns out that efficiency or the fuel consumption drops as a cube function. So if you go twice as fast, it's 8 times the resistance. So fuel mileage really drops once you get up past a certain point. And most people understand that in some sort of a dim way. But that's just the way everything works. Everything works. You take an agricultural system and pour nutrients through it faster than nature would do, and it leaks. It leaks inevitably. And so the worst crops are the ones where you put the most stuff through, corn. This is what makes corn ethanol even doubly dangerous, is because it's I don't know how many of you know that when corn prices skyrocketed, they started to plant corn all over the southern part of the Susquehanna watershed. And now there's nitrates going into the Susquehanna at rates they didn't have before, because corn takes a lot of inputs and they leak. And there's no magic. There's no magic. You can't just say, well, farm better and it won't happen. It's the way the system works. You can keep it from being quite so bad, but it's inevitable. All right? So not only the amount we use, but the rate at which we push it through the system is incredibly important. Well, we live in a society which basically lives on speed. Everything we do is fast. And the faster we go, the more waste we produce. There is no way around it. And this is why Andrew's comments about slowing things down. They're so important. If you can't slow things down, if you got to continue to live fast, forget it. There's no point. No point even trying to be sustainable. Well, I can be sustainable and not change my lifestyle. You can't. There's no way around it. You change your lifestyle or forget about even thinking about it. And so this is why gardens are kind of cool, because Gardens can do a number of things. A, they can decrease waste a significant amount. I mean, all sorts of things you might put out to the curb, you don't put out to the curb anymore. Now there's something different, you know. I mean, I'm kind of a compost nut. Kevin and I laugh about this. You know, we just smile, look at our big compost piles. I mean, it's it's like having a big bank account. I got a big compost pile. You don't. So we feel very differently about our compost. And so when you get this big 5-gallon bucket half full of garbage, it's woohoo, more compost. And, so we're happy, And so again, it changes your viewpoint on these things. I can think of all kinds of ways you could change things like that. Like when the day comes that I can no longer go over to Vestal and pick up grass and leaves off the curb to make compost with, then I'll start mowing my own lawn and raking up the clippings and putting them on my garden, which will be good because it'll slow my lawn down because I'll be transferring nutrients from my lawn to the garden. But I'm too lazy. It's much easier to go to Vestal. As long as those people are throwing stuff away by the boatload, I'll just go pick it up. But when that doesn't happen anymore and I have to think more conservatively, I might even rake leaves, for God's sake, and use my own stuff internally. So it can be very important that way. It obviously can decrease the distance to your food. I mean, it's right in the freaking backyard, right? 1,500 miles, how about 20 feet? But it also increases the safety of your food. I mean, boy, this stuff. I just got back from New Zealand, and the people I was staying with were reasonably conscious of their food, but we went to buy some food for a little camping trip we were taking, and he reaches over and grabs a can of Kraft peanut butter, and he says, "Don't say it." He says, "We have a reason for this." He says, "All the other brands come from China. And when the push comes to shove, we'd rather eat Kraft than peanuts from China." Well, that's a straight food safety issue. I mean, you just have the trust isn't there. The trust isn't there, and for good reason. Okay. So, but also they can increase consciousness. I mean, it makes you aware of things you weren't aware of before. It slows things down a little bit, I mean, you can garden fast if you want to, but it's not an undertaking that tends to encourage speed. You don't go ripping through the garden, tearing things up. Well, of course we do, actually. I mean, that's part of the problem. Rototillers, all these foolish little machines you use. But for me, gardening with the least amount of equipment possible is the best way, because and I've got some ways you can do that. Well, I say a little bit about community gardens. To add to what's been said before, they do create opportunities. They can create opportunities for people who don't own property. And we are just beginning here, and both the previous speakers have alluded to this. We can use all the help we can get. We can use help from people who can help find sites. We can use help from people who can help find materials. Anybody who knows where there's a stash or about to be a stash of 2x6 or 2x8 or 2x4 treated lumber from somebody who tore down a deck, that's perfect for us. It's leaked enough, there isn't anything left in it probably, and we need to make a lot of beds. Well, we can't afford to go out and buy that stuff at the lumber yard, in the scale that we need it, but sometimes somebody tears down a big enough deck, you can make a couple of gardens out of it. So anybody hears about anything like that, well, contact John or me, or it'd be a huge help. We got a little bit now, but not much. Somebody tore down a huge deck, and we haven't quite used it all up yet. But we can use lots of help there. So community gardens have lots of potential in poorer neighborhoods, and in Binghamton, it's particularly interesting because, and probably other areas as well, because these are neighborhoods that tend to have more vacant lots. And we definitely need to find ways to use these. And we need to recognize that a vacant lot is not going to be built on tomorrow. Don't say, well, we don't want to put a garden there because somebody might build a house there. Forget it. The odds of this happening are not great. The best example I've heard of a community who actually used this as an asset, at least in part, was Detroit. I mean, Detroit was so shot at and blasted that they looked at downtown Detroit and says, nobody's going to build here, and they made a farm in downtown Detroit. Because, look, you're not going to build there, why not? And so it's a thriving farm with a good business, and, all right. Another aspect of gardening, real important, ties into other things people have been saying. The energy cost of our food supply right now is someplace between 10 and 15 calories of fossil fuels to get 1 calorie here. Now, you don't have to go to rocket science school to figure out that that's slightly unsustainable. All right? I mean, we think ethanol is bad because it takes 1.2 gallons of fuel to get one gallon of ethanol or something like that. This is absurd. You wouldn't live very long if it took you 15 calories of food to get 1 calorie of food back. The only way you could do that is if you had more food than you'd have any idea what to do with. Like if you had an old barn full of corn and say, how can I get rid of this corn? I'll feed it to a cow. That'll do it. So that's, we could go into surplus foods and how we get rid of them. But garden food would be less than 1 to 1. Depending on how you do it. Now, there are some subtleties here. If you're going to rototill everything and get hand-powered weasel or motor-powered weasel-y things or whatever to weed your garden, whatever, yeah, you can probably put more energy in than you get out. But if you just do it simply and the most relaxing, I run a rototiller, and it's kind of fun for a while, kicking nature's butt. But it wears thin after a while, going bam, 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 bam across there. So the way I garden and the way I teach people to garden, he can tell you, is what's called biointensive raised bed gardening. I assume Renee is going to teach something like that. And when you do that, you create a soil that's between 1 foot and 1.5 foot deep that feels just like chocolate cake crumbs. Now, you need a couple tools. You really need a shovel. You really need a spading fork. But for most of the year, I don't use anything. A trowel is overkill. I just use my hands because I can stick my hand right down in and go that far. So there's no use to use it. You just prepare the soil correctly. But in the process of gardening this way, the real inputs are human energy. And so you create a great soil, you get some exercise in the process so you don't have to drive across town to the fitness club or whatever the hell it is. You can just go out in your backyard, right? Cool. The other thing they do is they use water efficiently. It's phenomenal. I remember a few years ago we had like a 4 or 5 week drought, and I was off someplace like I usually am for a month, and I came back and figured the plants would all be dead. They weren't. Nobody had watered them in a month, and they were still there. But that was a time when I could dig any place else, go down a foot and get dust. But this tremendous crumb structure that you build up with all this humus made it work very, very well. So there are all sorts of advantages to gardening, and it's going to become. We're not that far away. I mean, we've talked about the coming energy crunch. It's not it's not a question of whether, it's a question of when. And sooner or later, more and more people are going to turn towards gardening for all sorts of reasons. They're getting scared of their food supply, and they really ought to. Your food supply is being run largely by huge corporations. And I hate to tell you this, but the bigger the corporation is, the less they care about you. I hope that isn't a shock. And you can put it right on a graph. I think people have. And there's no reason for them to. By law, they're not even supposed to. It's against the law for them to care about you. Right? They have to care about their shareholders. And I own a share of How many of you own shares of Archer Daniels Midland?
Who knows what my...
Ah, okay, there we go. Guilty. No, I don't. So, but your food supply is being run as much as anything by Archer Daniels Midland and Cargill and Monsanto. Well, if you don't know anything about Monsanto, a few years ago, we had a sort of a friend and a colleague of mine come to our university, a fellow by the name of David Ehrenfeld, who's one of the better environmental writers I know. And I talked David into coming in and talk to my eco-ag class. But beforehand, we were talking about who are the worst corporations in the world. He didn't even hesitate. He said Monsanto and Bayer. And Bayer was because they built the gas chambers for the Nazis and some other things like that. But Monsanto has a track record that goes way back. DDT, Agent Orange, BGH, and so forth. Well, who the hell do you think is selling the seeds that are producing most of the soybeans in the world? Right? So, and you think you can rely upon them for food safety or ADM or Cargill? Forget it. Forget it. These guys don't care one about you. They're in it for the money, and that's it. That's why we get this absolutely insane farm policy, because the farm policy is dictated by those guys. And look up their campaign contributions. They're huge. So avoid the damn people and grow your own food. Don't buy Monsanto seeds. You got to be a little bit careful, because Monsanto and Dow have bought up a major share of the world's seed companies. That's one of the few things my father and I agreed on when he was alive. He was an old Republican. When he found out the corporations were buying up seed companies, a light bulb went off. And he says, whoa, this isn't good. Because he was a gardener. Everybody in our family has gardened back to the Stone Age. And I'm just the latest one. And my sister gardens, my brother gardens, and my son is a farmer, and my other son's a gardener. So it just goes on. It's a disease. Gardening allows you to at least disconnect from these systems and get back to real systems. So I advocate it, for everybody.
I just want to say two very quick things that struck me from what we heard tonight. One was something that Andrew said earlier and Dick just repeated about slowing down life. And as a parent, I've had a new appreciation of the necessity to do that. And I think it also allows us to do some other things that are really important, like pay attention to our neighbors, communities, what we're eating, and our local environment, which is not only necessary to be sustainable, it's also great fun. And there's a lot of other reasons to do these things. The second thing that struck me is that in terms of what we mean by a node of permanence or a sustainability center or whatever it ends up being called, it strikes me that we're talking about something that is very holistic, as Amelia and Andrew and others spoke of. We can't simply speak of the important necessity of being environmentally sustainable. When we're talking about food systems, if many people can't eat these wonderful things that we're going to grow, this is going to create a whole host of other problems. And part of what needs to be done as part of this work is make everybody aware of what's going on. And many of us foresee the Sustainability Center as a center of outreach, a center of coming together, of networking within our community and with other communities in the region, and a place where we can really create circles of change of all kinds. That being said, I'm going to open it up to any sort of question that you have. Please come up to the microphone, if you would, for the benefit of this, or I can come to you. No, I can't. I don't have the cord, so you have to come here. And you can either direct your question at a particular person or to the panel at large.
Well, I just have two questions. When you spoke about the triad, or Trinity rather, I expected to hear you say something like energy, food, and overpopulation. And although you touched briefly on overpopulation, you just sort of skipped over it. And I thought maybe we should have a little more. Maybe there was a little more information or input about the overpopulation of the world that might be helpful. The other thing is, it's always fun to pick on corporations who have their own sense of culture and their own sense of responsibility. But many people who are involved in the environmental movement are very small, entrepreneurial type people who have farmers markets and those sorts of things. I had hoped to hear a little bit more about that sort of culture. So.
Well, talk about modeling behavior, and not to minimize the population problem, but we sit here in this country, with 5% of the world's population and consume 30% of the, I think those are the rough figures, 30% of the world's resources. And we're modeling this behavior for the rest of the world. And, I think something that we need to just be mindful of is that, again, kind of referring back to, what many of us said from our various viewpoints, the fact that we just can't, the world cannot live according to the model that we're modeling out. And I'm using modeling in this case that, we as a society. And what we can do, I think Andrew's absolutely right, what we can do is to model a different way of life. And that would go a long way towards ensuring that there'd be enough for all.
I'd like to address the second point about, talking about how much power corporations have, and not really, we didn't talk a terrible amount about how much power we have as individuals when we come together and organize. And, most of you have probably seen the picture of, or the little caricature of a school of fish, coming together to eat the big fish. Bunch of little fish eating the big fish. And you might think I'm idealistic, you might think I'm young. I don't care, I'm gonna be idealistic till the day I die, because when we lose hope, that's when corporations win, that's when we give other people power. So I think that if we organize together, there are a lot of great things we can accomplish. And for me, I look at what we can accomplish on the local level. And I mentioned food policy councils and community food security coalitions. Those are fantastic models for organizing all people that have an interest in our food system and addressing problems in a local way. They find ways to help farmers become more economically viable, to help increase food access, to start community gardens, things like this. There's some great models in Portland, Oregon. They have a great food policy council. I dream that we'll have one here someday, so we can start addressing these things together. We can have farmers, consumers, food processors all at the same table, so we can start to build a local food system that's more sustainable.
Let me just make a quick comment about corporations, because I'm pretty good at bashing them, and with good reason. They scare the crap out of me. But what I'm really especially concerned about is big corporations. I'm concerned about big anything. Because the bigger you get, the less connected you are with what really matters. And you're more just focused on just accumulating wealth and power. And that's just the way it is. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, whatever you want to say. And so that's the real problem, that we've created a political structure that has allowed corporations to become very big and very powerful. A system that will allow Exxon and Mobil to merge, for example. Well, that's absolute lunacy, But why did we allow it to happen? Gee, I wonder who has a lot of political power, who gives enormous campaign contributions, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the real problem. I'm not knocking businessmen or the mom and pop corporation. I know there's zillions of corporations with 2 people in them because it shields them from liability. That's not the problem. It's big anything. How many of you have ever seen the statistics that rich people give smaller amounts of their income as charity than poor people? It's the same process.
My name is Shauna McClure-Berry, and my husband and I are organic crop farmers in Cuga County. And we came down tonight, Barbara Abbott King, my other friend who's a farmer, because Aaron is here with the Sierra Club. I'm a member of the Sierra Club. I was a banker before I married a third-generation farmer who never took a penny of a grant or a subsidy until the very late 90s. So I would first of all like to thank everyone who is interested in commerce and food sustainability. And I actually would just like to share a few facts and figures with everyone, because we all have an equal value and an equal reason for being in this room. Is the sustainability of what's going on. There's only just over 6,200 farmers that are left in New York State that grows $100,000 or more. And that would be, to give you an example, a 50-cow dairy farmer would gross $100,000 to $125,000. The majority, 90% of our farms in New York State are dairy farmers, which is great. Everyone likes dairy farmers. Crop farmers are non-existent. So if anyone would actually look at the real statistics in what corn is, we have 3 kinds of corn that's grown in the state of New York. We have silage, which is a green corn that's chopped for cows. We have corn that is grown that feeds to hogs or chickens or goes to tortillas or corn chips. So it's both human. It goes to the equestrian world. And we have sweet corn. The majority of grants and subsidies that has been given to corn, especially in New York State, has actually been to silage, because the livestock factories got together and saw that they had a great way to get another extra piece of the government welfare check with the large farms. A mid-size or even some large or some small dairies would not feel that way. So when people talk about corn subsidies, they assuming that they're talking about field corn, when actually it's silage that's going through animals, which is totally different. The other thing is, there's all sorts of, ethanol is not the only alternative food out or fuel out there. There's also soybeans, which can go to biodiesel. So any of us in this room could have, for $10,400, a piece of apparatus that we could press soybeans and we can make biodiesel fuel that would go into our cars, would go into our houses, and back to the entrepreneurship this gentleman was talking about. But the big problem is you have the Department of Agriculture and Markets in the state of New York, and I'm sorry to say this, Cornell University, which is driving the mode, that wants to have only large, very few farms. So with a $470 million budget in the Department of Agriculture, they don't look at the seed dealerships that this gentleman is talking about, that when Monsanto comes in and asks you to be a test plot, and you go to them and you said, we don't really like the GMOs, which is a genetic modified organism that goes into the crop, because it's destroying the bud population. So instead of the Department of Agriculture Markets or Cornell Cooperative Extension or the USDA saying, whoa, wait a minute, we want to look at why this is, instead, they not only look the other way, they help to put out these type of farmers. So what I'm saying is there's not very many farmers left. And if everyone really wants to start making a difference, the first thing, what we beseech you all to do, if you're interested about sustainability, is look at farm credit, look at the USDA, look at your ag and markets, get the numbers straight, see how few farmers there are left, see how that the 80% of the farmers that are in the state of New York don't want grants or subsidies, but they want to be able to borrow money so that they can get their crops or their food in or their livestock, and take it from an entrepreneurship attitude, as this gentleman in the back. We will never be sustainable until we call the banking system into that's destroying, which is where the Monsantos and all these places are getting all their money. Thank you very much.
Here's an example of knowledge in our community, how if we are able to create sustainability centres, I'm certainly not an expert. I'm the keynote speaker. You make me seem like I'm an expert, but I'm just an Aussie boy who happened to land up in Binghamton and pretty passionate about this issue. And here's this woman over here, pretty similar. She could have been the keynote tonight. And I think that if we can form this little centre and begin to gather this information, and I'm going to get her phone number when I leave because I want to learn from her, we can each one teach one, and we can start to move forward together. Big or small. I don't know where this is exactly going to go, but I get the feeling we're getting started.
My name is Timothy Walcott. I'm a middle school and high school science teacher, and I like to pose a question and a suggestion to the panel and to the people in general. I recently returned from a forum that said that one of the main linchpins of the social justice issue and agricultural and environmental and peace could be put together at the juncture of privatization of water and water access. And people around the world, as well as your local neighborhoods, are more concerned about pollution in their streams, pollution in their rivers and lakes, the privatization of their public supplies, the export of their waters to other countries, the multinational corporations taking over water supplies, and people from the most conservative backgrounds as well as the most progressive backgrounds all agree that their water is a sacred, precious symbol to them. And if we could have at this group a stakeholder for water and have that be somewhat centralized, I think you'll get more of a groundswell in the community across the political spectrum and social economic spectrum. That's my suggestion. And my question is this. Are there monies that are available for this sustainability project specifically? Thank you.
One thing you could do is stop buying bottled water. You know, Coke and Pepsi are taking water out of taps and selling it at what, about a 10,000 or 100,000% markup?
Well, that water issue is a very complicated one, and it's a huge one, and I think you're right. It's something that we can organize around. It's like food. It's something that we all need to live. So I agree with you, and hopefully the Sustainability Center can make water an aspect that we educate people around. In terms of funding for the Sustainability Center, there are grants out there that we can use to help start the center. And I think, as Andrew said, there are also properties around the city that we can make use of for a very small amount. It might be $1. Some of you might know about the Restore New York process. That's taking abandoned properties, properties that have been neglected, and turning them back over to people for $1 so that they can be redeveloped. So that is a great opportunity, and we are going to do everything we can to find money within the state, within our county if we can, any sort of funds that would be available to it. And I have confidence that we'll find it and that we'll make this happen. But we will need, for anyone who's a grant writer out there, we will need your assistance. So please, lend it to us if you can.
I would like to add one thing. It's true that because the urgency of these issues has become apparent even to the public sector officials that supposedly represent us, there will be monies from the federal, state, and probably county governments. There is always a danger here that we end up with something that is what we call greenwashed. That is something that is about sort of the surface kinds of things that people here have criticized or are going to change the way we drive a little bit, change the way we use our materials a little bit, but we're not going to fundamentally change anything. And I'm very heartened by the fact that the people in this room have not been talking like that at all, but we have to be mindful of the fact that that's not the way it necessarily is at all levels. And one way to really give us economic security if we have this center going forward is by basing as much as possible of that financing on the community, specifically on sustainer funding, sort of like public television does. That is, the more we have coming from small donations, maybe not so small for those with deep pockets right here in the region, the better. That's not to say that what Amelia says isn't true. It is. We're going to need help from everybody we can get. But we really want to build that local support, and so people literally take ownership of this. Next question.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Riddle, and I'm very excited that we're all talking about food because that's one of my personal passions in terms of environmental work that I do. And Shauna was talking about federal subsidies, and if you want to know more about federal subsidies, who's getting them, how much they're getting, you can Google something called the Environmental Working Group, which has a database of all of the farm subsidies that have been granted, and they list the top recipients by county and by state, and you can see how much different farmers have gotten. And when you go there, what you'll see is in Broome County, I think it was from 2003 to 2005, there were over $1 million that were granted to farmers alone in Broome County, which is a lot of money. So when you're looking at farm subsidies, what happens is that large corporate farmers tend, they cause a lot of pollution problems, and the response of the federal government and the state government is, we're going to help you fix that problem by giving you money so that you can implement this new technology. So what happens is it's like a encouragement to continue doing what you're doing, and the hope is that they're going to fix the problem, but it doesn't really happen. It just makes them get bigger. Exactly. And it's always phrased in the way that it's new technology and it's going to fix it because it's a new approach, and it's going to try and address a problem that's been created by the system, which isn't really recognized. What's the message is that this new technology is going to fix the problem. The other thing I wanted to say was recently I've become in something called the rights-based organizing. And what that is the recognition that there's, I think most of you might be aware of the fact that recently corporations found a way that they can gain corporate personhood, which means that they have the same rights as all of us in the room have. So what that means is they're protected by the Constitution the same way that we are, right? Does that make any sense at all? So, right. So the response to that has been that, with corporate personhood, in addition to that, the realization that environmental activists have been kind of like running their wheels in terms of the environmental work that they've been doing. So what happens is we go to these hearings, these public hearings, and we give our opinions about the way that they should do it, whether they should build a Walmart, whether they should do this or not. And they sit up there and they listen to us, or maybe they don't. And then they decide to do it anyways, right? They pass the law and then they build the Walmart. So the response has been that these people who are on these panels are not really responding to the people in the community, they're responding to the corporations. So rights-based organizing approach is the concept that we as people in a community have the right to decide the way our community looks. We don't have to go to the DEC. We don't have to go to the EPA. What they do is they issue permits so that corporations can pollute. They have permits to pollute. They don't have they have regulation that's very loose, that doesn't really protect the community, doesn't protect our water, doesn't protect our air. So what people do in their communities do is they decide, we have the right to decide the way that we want our community to look. We were talking about bottled water. In Barnstead, New Hampshire, people in their community got their local legislature to pass an ordinance that prohibited the export of water from their community to be bottled. They passed a law that made an impact on their community. That's an amazing thing. That didn't have anything to do with state regulators. That didn't have anything to do with federal regulators. That's amazing. We can do that. We can say, you know what? The corporations do not have the right to decide the way our community looks. That's up to us. But I'm really excited about this idea of people being involved in their community and making decisions about the way that their community is and having ideas, because who better can decide what's best for our community than us? The corporations don't have any invested interest in the way this community looks. They want the resources, they want the profit. That's all they care about.
I would just add, I hope people are starting to make the connections here, but and it's amazing how this is surfacing in so many different ways. Many people may not be aware, but actually the whole IDA, Industrial Development Agency, enabling legislation has basically died at this point because the Assembly has passed a bill to reform the IDAs. IDAs give a lot of subsidies. And in this community, at least, the whole idea ostensibly is that it's supposed to create jobs. Yet in our particular area, we're second to the bottom in terms of actually not creating jobs, but IDA projects have actually lost jobs in this area. We've done just a terrible job of it. But the point being that the Assembly bill is trying to put some more accountability into the process, assure that perhaps that the community has a little more say about what actually comes out of the various projects that the IDA might be promoting. And basically it's all stalled because the Senate doesn't want things like prevailing wage stuff or living wage for any entity, any business that ultimately gets set up with your funds, your taxpayer dollars. They want to create jobs that are pay less than living wage, which basically means you then turn around and subsidize those wages with more taxpayer dollars that could very well be coming out of the business, the small mom and pop business that bigger business is competing against. So, it almost seems, and I'm getting more and more of the mind to, just get government out of subsidizing, period, because you can bet bottom dollar anything that the government subsidizes, it's being directed by powers bigger than us, and usually in the wrong direction.
I just wanted to follow up with that. And I'm sure that Shauna could tell you more about this, but I know that there's a lot of CAFOs or factory farms that have received state money through the Empire State Zoning Subsidy Program. So generally that's a program that's supposed to encourage businesses in economically depressed areas, but there are factory farms that are receiving that money, and that's not a sustainable, productive way for us to be supporting businesses through state money.
Check out it's interesting that George Will, who's a fairly conservative columnist, except believe it or not, you may be interested to hear it. Like 2 days ago, he came out and basically was saying that a lot of business subsidies are basically social welfare, and so.
He's bound to be right once in a while.
Yeah, Yeah. He was the same one, by the way, that came out years ago that the only difference between Democrats and Republicans is the Democrats like to tax and spend, and the Republicans like to borrow and spend. So.
I guess I'd like to hear if anyone on the panel or in the audience at this point has something they want to contribute towards something they really would like to see a sustainability center do. We've heard a lot of those things. And I'm actually going to start off sort of on this very recent thread of what Aaron has said and others have said. It's pretty clear that one of the things that has to happen is that in addition to growing more of our own food and changing the way that we get to places and the rest, we're also going to have to change our political systems. And starting locally seems like the best bet. As you probably know, most local offices go uncontested. You may not know that it's actually not as hard to take over local political entities. What's happened in the city of the Binghamton in the last 3 years, I think, is indicative of that. The problem is that we've forgotten or never knew a lot of the things about our own history of how communities organize to better their own interests and around the world. This is what I teach in a college, at Hartwick College. And the young people who come to my classes, by and large, never learned about the farmer-labor alliances during the early part of this century, never learned about the various stages of the union movement, never learned that before there was ever a Martin Luther King, there were all kinds of people whose names we haven't heard that built that movement. And there's skills that you need to know in order to organize that we don't get taught. And I would like to see those things being taught at this center, and also the inspirational history, not only in our own country, but around the world, of people making better lives for themselves through their own efforts. So I guess that's my one input. I'd like to hear some others. And, one little plug for a book by Bill McKibben called Deep Economy. And the reason I'm making this plug is that one of the main arguments he makes is our obsession with more stuff is making us utterly miserable. We are a very, very depressed nation. And this kind of slowing down, paying attention, getting to know yourselves, getting to know others, getting to know the community and the environment, it's not only necessary for our survival and the survival of the planet, it's just great fun, and it makes us happy, so we should do it.
One thing I'd like to see in it is Amelia and I had been working on a food security grant for Binghamton called the Binghamton Food Initiative. And that's stalled right now by the Farm Bill. But what we were trying to do is really work on the food accessibility and really make the connections between local farmers and the grocery stores here, make sure that there's community gardens. I would say 2 per every square mile. Just make sure that even convenience stores have local produce in them, and just really focus on that stuff. We were joking with the director of planning about doing aquaculture in the city of Binghamton, which is would be a very viable. What?
No joke.
Yeah. So I'd like to see that in the center as well.
I'm Julian Shepard. I'd just like to say that part of a sustainability center, would be attention to green space and generally natural areas too. That hasn't come up much here, but I think for me personally, actually, the greatest wealth in the world is the tremendous wealth of living organisms, just how they've evolved over however long it is, millions of years, billions of years, and sort of keep that in mind as something that we need to encourage appreciation for.
I think Amelia wants to. Yes, there is a Shade Tree Commission. Do you want to say? I don't think anything's been said about the Shade Tree Commission.
Well, I'll be glad to say something because Dick has already said too much. Dick is the chair of our Binghamton Shade Tree Commission. We do have a strong effort to repopulate the city with shade trees. And it's pretty simple-minded in concept, and that is we just want to get more trees planted around the city for their multiple benefits. Not just beauty, but also shading and many other reasons. Yes. And growing worms and things.
Well, let me just follow up on something that what Julian said made me think of, and then Jim can go. But I envision a strong youth component, and I think about that when I think about green space, because green space offers, and experiences with a natural environment offers kids such a great educational opportunity and the opportunity to develop a sense of environmental stewardship, but it's also very good for their mental and physical health. There are studies coming out showing how kids that have active experiences in green spaces then have more of an ability to focus. Their symptoms of ADD decrease. We know that people heal faster when they have views of green space from their hospital rooms. So I think we need to get people actively involved in our green spaces, and we do that, with youth outreach. We also do that with outreach for all ages, too. That's what I see.
I'm Jim Bryden. I guess I want to address what Adam's question was about making what this is about sustainable. Not seeing somebody else jump up. And I'm reflecting on the mid-'70s. Remember the mid-'70s? There was a so-called energy crisis. What came out of that locally, one thing anyway, was what was called an alternate energy club. Very interesting group of 30, 40, 50 people that would show up once a month for speakers and exchanging ideas on how to do their own solar collectors and the like. Oddly enough, NYSEG was indirectly part of all that. The point is, it lasted 3 years. A lot of people had a lot of fun, just your local neighbors and the like, and that was it. So any of you out there of my age understand how unsustainable that was. It just, the world coming to the end and so forth disappeared very quickly. I suspect most of the people in this room feel that the current crisis, however you want to define it, is going to be sustainable. But still, it takes a lot of education to get Johnny on the street to understand that. Regarding the Sustainable Center, I would like to help move that along. The idea of it is good, and it suggests a physical center where a lot of people come together physically to exchange ideas, not just by email. What is obvious to me, somebody just talked about the most important resource. It's fine, organisms. Clearly to me, the most important resources are human beings and the ones that have the best knowledge to address the problem you're trying to resolve. And what we have here in the Triple Cities is quite unique to an area of only a couple 100,000 people. We have a remarkable educational institution in Binghamton University with enough departments in that institution to be addressing pretty much everything we've talked about tonight. We're very fortunate. We don't have to go to Ithaca, Syracuse, Albany, etc. Not that we wouldn't necessarily not go to those institutions and anywhere else in the world for information, but the fact that we have, and represented right here in this room still tonight, a number of very educated people that are the teachers to teach other teachers that are not in the educational field. So I guess what I'm getting at is, first of all, New York State has made this point of having these educational centers. If you don't know that, the energy field and the like center is Syracuse University. And they're pumping in millions of dollars into these centers. RPI is another technological center. As I understand Binghamton University's role in this pumping millions from tax dollars into the educational centers, ours is circuit boards and the like. As citizens, we should be asking questions of Senator Libous and other people about these centers of development throughout the state and whether that makes sense that they have to specialize. But anyway, back to this sustainable center. To get it off the ground, my suggestion is you start it at the university. And whatever that takes. I see some squinting over here.
I don't see a high level of sensitivity.
Objection.
I'm just suggesting as a
sustain you there, Julian, but this is an important discussion.
Not that it's necessarily run by the university per se, but the university can funnel some dollars nationally and locally and statewide and so forth to getting it off the ground. Once that sort of thing happens, who knows what might happen if it's totally independent, totally separate, not-for-profit, able to run on itself. But what worries me is how often it takes, it's the inertia problem, and people are just anxious to go, and now.
I think you've underscored something really important, which is the teaching, learning, and research piece of this. And there is an approach to basically the utilization of higher educational resources called community-based research and community-based learning. But it's a very different model than the traditional research university model. And frankly, community colleges, some land-grant universities, and a fair amount of private universities often are on this page a little better than the research universities. But the idea simply is this. The problem, the research problem, is co-generated between community and researcher, educator, whether it's faculty and or graduate students. Secondly, many forms of knowledge are valued, not just those of the expert who has the PhD and the credential, but community expertise, and they bring different resources to the table. And third, the point of the exercise is not simply to publish in your field. The point is to change a problem that needs changing. And this is not rocket science, but many universities are not set up to encourage this. That is not hard to do if there's the will to do it. Preferably both on the part of faculty leaders as well as administrators. Frankly, when the governor's higher educational committee came back and I saw the summary of their report, I didn't see this anywhere. Most of what's discussed are fairly traditional forms of collaboration that happen up here. And I think what Dick's grumbling and nodding over there points to is that while there are wonderful people with great skills that you've pointed to, the institutions do not make it easy or sometimes even do anything but discourage that work, particularly of junior people. Once you've got tenure, once you're relatively senior, there's a little more freedom. They can't stop you. And and so obviously we would welcome the support of Binghamton University, Broome Community College, TC3, all of the different institutions. And I had heard about Hinchy's Solar Energy Initiative, but I didn't know that these 5 institutions were part of it. I think the question comes back to what Aaron and others were talking about, is this needs to be something that the community has most stay in. And too many of the initiatives in this area have been controlled, like everything else we're talking about, from the top. That's just not going to make the change we need. So, Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I would just say I'm for whatever works, but I think we should not ignore the possibility of perhaps partnering with the community college, Broome Community College as well. You talk about inertia. There's inertia there too, but perhaps just the fact that it's not so big might make it more flexible. And that doesn't preclude any input from the university, but it might be easier to deal with. So I think we should be exploring both possibilities, quite frankly. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to just pick up on, this we obviously had a short program. We couldn't dwell on everything, but the planners had mentioned energy as a topic. We just couldn't fit it in, but I mentioned it briefly just to give people a heads up that I currently chair the county's Energy Advisory Board. That is actually the second go-around for me, because I too was a part of that earlier effort when energy was all the rage, and we put some ideas together that was actually pretty comprehensive, and put it into a nice little report, and then that report kind of gathered dust in the planning department for all these years, and now we're back around. It's funny how those things work. You stick around long enough and you get to see it all over again, right? But my sense is we're in a different place now. For better or for worse, this energy crisis isn't going to go away like the last one. Not that we didn't go. Not that it never left us really, but it got buried, obviously. But I think that's at least one venue by which I would encourage you, anyone who has that interest, to become a part of that. Like I say, I chair that, and it's an open process. And if you have an interest, we'll plug you in. And certainly, as this effort develops, I think those ties will need to be made.
I'm Rima Love, and I'll try to make it real fast, okay? And in a way, I feel like I have a nerve even speaking to folks, because I haven't been that active. I actually live outside of this community. I live in Afton, and I gave up a long time on anything politically there. Everything I do is down here, in addition to the fact that his office is down here. But I'm hearing this and feeling that a sustainability center has to be inclusive. Yes, we have to draw on the best minds and the wisest people, the most information that can be gathered in, but it has to be community. This is what's wrong with our whole country today, except for isolated areas, maybe Portland, maybe Burlington, Vermont, maybe Austin, Texas. There are a few areas where the people of a community really feel they have some voice. If it's going to work, it's got to work for ordinary people to be able to come in to a center and learn something, whether it's through materials, through talking with others, through a workshop here and a workshop there. We can't do it all, but I think we really need the people. We haven't had that in this country for so long. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Daryl Cox. I'm a co-teacher of permaculture with Andrew at the Hancock Permaculture Centre, and I'm just thinking this community I think is ready for a permaculture course, and so you might want to think about, we have some great teachers in the Northeast, and maybe we can invite them to come, or something like that, and maybe just get people grounded in permaculture. It encompasses so much information, and in the 72 hours of the course you'll learn a lot, and I think you'll have a greater appreciation of what's going on and what you can do about it. So maybe think about it, and maybe this is something the Sustainability Centre can coordinate, organise, and maybe even to get it started. So it's just a thought, and you've got to make it happen. So if you're interested, then Andrew's the contact. You can let him know if people are interested, or maybe a committee that's formed for the sustainability, maybe they can organise it. So anyway, just to put it out there, we've got some great teachers. There's a lot of very, very great information that you can take on and learn, and it would really help you a lot. I've got my permaculture design certificate 2 years ago from Andrews and Hancock Permaculture Centre for some great teachers that came, and I've been living permaculture now for 2 years, and I'm never going to stop doing that now. I just want to keep pushing it out there. That's why I'm teaching now. So if you're interested, let Andrew know and we'll get a course here.